I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never
All right. Episode 22 of the Reckless Musecast. We've got a special guest, David Krae. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah, so you're kind of a renaissance man. You've done a lot of creative stuff. Like you've got a background in film and writing, and you're also a musician too.
Yeah, well, I used to be a musician, I guess. I play a little guitar.
That's cool.
But
Yeah.
Shred some gnar.
yeah, I played some music when I was
That's
younger.
every musician.
But yeah, mostly writing these days, obviously, because of COVID. It's kind of slowed down the world a bit. But did the schmacting thing for a while, and now just and then filmmaking, and yeah, the last couple of years have been writing a lot.
What are you
Nice.
writing?
All kinds of stuff, other than mean tweets on Twitter.
Wait, so speaking of Renaissance man, you wrote 2 books about the Borgias?
Okay, the Borgias. So, wow.
Did you like that segue?
2002, I want to say, no, 2001. So that's going back a ways. Or even before that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I was a starving actor back in the day and wanted to take a Shakespeare study class to improve my Elizabethan pentameter skills, and was too broke, couldn't afford it. So I thought, well, what if I just learn by emulating? So, learn by doing. So I broke out a bunch of Shakespeare, read a bunch of it, went to the library, studied the language, and then wrote a play. Tried to write a play, I should say, in like a Shakespeare style play using. Where was I? Oh yeah. So I thought I'll write this play and practice that way and learn that way, because that's, I guess, how learn by rote or by repetition or by copying. Anyway, so I wrote a play. It was, parts of it are actually turned out all right, but it was pretty rudimentary. I was pretty young, and at the time I had stumbled across the story of Lucretia Borgia, and I thought, what a great story if you're going to do like a Shakespearean type of setting, you think of like Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, the Borgias. Shakespeare was 1600s, Borgias were around 1500, early high Renaissance. Mm-hmm. So I thought this is perfect. And the story, I think it was a documentary that I caught part of, and it was debunking the myths of Lucretia Borgia, that she had been known for this as this evil temptress, this sort of salacious character, when she actually wasn't like that. I think part of it was, a book written by Victor Hugo, that I really think Lucretia Borgia and the Poison Ring or something like that, and also the fact that her father was the Pope and her brother was the Duke of Rome. So he was
a fun Pope. He was a really fun Pope.
The fun Pope.
Yeah.
Well, the Pope Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, which is Lucretia's father, he had 7 children and a mistress. His mistress, Julia I don't know how to pronounce this. I'm not Italian, but I don't speak Italian. Farnese or whatever. She was her nickname in Rome at the time was the Bride of Christ, because everyone knew she was banging the Pope. Right? It was like an open secret, and everyone just joked about it. There was a quote in a book I read. It said a quote from the day said, "If all the children born that year, and I think it was like 1500, came out with their father's clothes on, they would all come out priests and cardinals." Like, it was just like party time at the Vatican back then. So you figure all the no good that Rodrigo Borgia, or Pope Alexander VI, got up to, and his son as well, a lot of it, I think, got pinned on her. So she's kind of an interesting character who's been sort of maligned by history. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to do some learning, do some writing, and maybe write a story that can help rehabilitate the reputation of someone who's been, got a bad deal from history.
Well, 100% of my knowledge of the Borgias comes from the Showtime show.
Well, that's the second part of the story.
Pretty good show.
Yeah. Well, I wrote this play, and then I think in 2002 was my first foray to Los Angeles, and I did some networking, and I connected with this retired writer producer who helped me out. A guy by the name of Leonard Kaufman, who's sort of one of my mentors. He wrote and produced shows like Hawaii Five-0 and Daktari and Dukes of Hazzard. I think he was involved, and he did a bunch of stuff. But
cool.
he was retired by the time I met him, and Len was always, yeah, most of the people I know in Hollywood are dead, but I'll make a few calls, But he hooked me up with his literary agent, a guy by the name of Lou Weitzman, who has passed since. They both passed. They were both quite old at the time already, and over at Preferred Artists. And Lou said, "This is a great story." And he saw my list because I did a stack of screenplays. I actually, when I was a young actor struggling in Hollywood, I had also worked in film production, like crew. And I'd met, this is a bit of a side tangent, I met Matt Damon when he showed up to make Good Will Hunting. In fact, I almost had the job to be his assistant while he was in town. But it went to a buddy of mine that I'd worked with on an indie film in the wintertime, and he'd done a little more work than I had, so he'd earned more dues, so the job went to him instead. But anyway, you meet this guy, I'm like, he's wrote a script, he gets to star in it, he's got his whole career ahead of him. I'm like, that's what I want to do, right? And anyway, so I had a stack of scripts and went out to Hollywood and, as a writer, actor. Anyway, Lou looked at this script, this play, and he said, it's a play. You can't sell a play in verse in Hollywood. He's like, no, it's not, no. Especially at the time, nobody was interested in like Shakespeare kind of stuff at the time. Anyway, he said, if it was a screenplay, a movie script might be able to do something. And I said, well, let me get back to you. So I flipped it into a screenplay, and he shopped it around and got lots of interest from a number of companies. But there was someone else shopping a Borgia project around at the time, a guy by the name of Neil Jordan, who was shopping his Borgia project, which became the Borgias, the TV show that everyone a few years later. My agent said, look, he's Neil Jordan and you're nobody. Right? You get a lot of that when you first get to Hollywood. You're like, who are you? And he's,
Right.
So they basically said, you'll have to shelve it, wait 10 years or so, wait for the Borgia project to come and go, for that topic to cool off, and maybe in another century you can maybe have your shot.
Right.
In the meantime, go out and keep working on trying to become somebody, because you're nobody. It's very humbling. Anyway, so then I did submit that script to the Beverly Hills Film Festival back in 2007 in their screenwriting competition, and it won. It got the Golden Palm Award for best script.
Cool.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. I made some good contacts through that, but again, Borgias were in full swing at that time, so nobody's interested yet. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll turn it into a novel. So I turned it into a novel and just stuck it on Amazon. Figured whatever, it can cook for a while. And a few people read it. They liked it, I guess. I got some good reviews, which is nice. But I'm not. Things have changed in the last 5 to 10 years. So a male writer writing a historical fiction with a female main character. I don't, I did send it out to some agencies, and I don't think I had the right identity to be that. Although people have read it, liked it. So
right.
Yeah, I see that all the time. We've talked about this and how much it sucks. Like I basically don't. I'm also a writer, by the way, and I basically don't submit my work really to publications anymore, because one is feels like a waste of time. I've been published in a few publications. Usually I just the one that Joe runs, I just send it his way. I'm like, here, Joe, I wrote something, put it up. And I noticed like I feel like more than half now, and I just checked. I get the emails like listing them. Like, here's 9 publications looking for short stories, right? Yeah. You go through them, and it's like we are only publishing LGBTQIA plus writers, or we're only publishing writers from this background or that, and it's like I don't understand why. I get like if you want to highlight certain stories, you might have a certain demographic. Like I understand that's fine, but why only writers from that background? Because you're just missing out on so much talent.
Well, and they're gonna get attacked if they don't, right? That's basically the way it works right now. They'll be put on a list, and they'll say, you don't devote X amount of your time or your resources to this, and this. Right, so they're just ticking boxes rather than looking at what the actual content is. Right. I think. I mean, there's nothing wrong with publishing all kinds of stuff from all kinds of different people, but when it becomes becomes the point.
Right.
It also does. It's the whole thing with like Joe Biden right now saying, I'm going to put a black woman on the Supreme Court. It's like, why don't you just do it instead of saying that? Because then she's going to get criticized no matter what for just you got put on there for your identity. I mean, look at Kamala Harris. She's a train wreck because you just want to put put someone who's competent in positions of power. And if you get to fill a certain demographic, that's great. But like this clearly didn't work. And I mean, she's the least popular vice president, like even more so than like Dick Cheney at the height of the Iraq War. And we all saw it. Like she didn't even make it to Iowa during the primaries. And it's just like, I'm going to put her there. What was that?
She wasn't well liked across the board at the primaries.
No, she was horrible.
They should have grabbed Tulsi. I mean, come on.
They tried to. It's just the kind of same consultants that I want to send to Eastern Ukraine are the ones who were saying like they just wanted to will her into existence. It's like, well, if we just put her there, she'll do fine. It's like, no, she's terrible. She's awful. And I'm sure you could have found many black or mixed race women who could have done a great job, but she's just horrible. But it was just like, well, she's next in line.
Well, she's also obedient, right? I mean, I think a lot of politics is who's gonna do what the establishment wants, who's gonna do what the inner circle, who's gonna toe the party line, right? And I think, for instance, like compare Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris. Who's gonna cause more trouble, right?
Right.
Well, my prediction on Twitter was, I think a year ago, I think it's gonna be Tulsi versus Kamala, and Tulsi's a Republican. I think she's gonna switch parties.
You think she'll switch?
I do.
My dream ticket would be like Justin Amash and Tulsi Gabbard. That would be, I think
that'd be good.
I'd probably vote for that.
But I don't get to vote in America, so.
Oh, that's right. Wait, so you're not a U.S. citizen?
No, I'm Canadian. So.
Right. But and
everyone thinks I am, though, huh?
Yeah.
On Twitter, I get attacked all the time as being the quintessential white male, blonde hair, blue eyed, evil villain, supervillain, American white privilege guy, and I laugh every time because I'm like, okay, first of all, the hoops. The years I spent just to get into the United States,
right?
To start at the bottom.
Yeah.
Anyone from anywhere in America just hop in their beat up Honda Civic and drive out to Hollywood. Yeah. Not me. No, I had spent years and years and years and lots of money on legal fees and immigration, all kinds of stuff just to be able to move there. Yeah. I could go there as a tourist and as a business person and hang around. But if you actually want to do anything, so you're starting below the bottom. So and I don't have deep pockets. I don't come from big money. I don't have generations of wealth.
Yeah. you don't come from like maple syrup money or anything.
Yeah, no.
Old maple syrup money.
Big maple.
No, on one side of the family, they were dirt poor farmers for generations, and the other side, refugees from Eastern Europe. So I'm first gen on one side, and so just poor.
Where are you from in Canada? What part?
Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah, I worked in Toronto for a lot of years doing, because it was a pretty big film center.
Yeah.
Like that's where they
Yeah,
filmed
TIFF
Good Will
and-
Hunting and
Yeah.
movies like that, and back in the late 90s.
Are you in LA now? Or are
No,
you in
not
Canada?
currently. No, I'm in the Knucklehead land here.
And how's that going?
It's cold. It's cold. I had a few setbacks in California. I had a film project collapse while in production, and kind of lost a lot of money and ended up. Yeah, it was a mess. Was
that COVID related or
no? It's before COVID, but when you're on a visa, right? Friends of mine, they were like, "Oh, I could hook you up with some work, if you could get back on your feet." And like, I had a buddy of mine who was, delivering food. Like he was like Uber food or whatever, Uber Eats, while like fielding calls with Paramount for a movie project, right? Because he was so broke. And that's film production, right? The problem is, when you're on a visa, you can't just go down the street and get work. You have to only work within your company doing the thing that you're doing, or doing the job you were approved to come in and do.
Right.
So you're kind of a captive to that. So when my situation imploded, and I had to pack everything up and exit, lest I run afoul of the it's not the INS anymore. I guess it's Homeland Security.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people who like, no, I'm gonna stay. I'll live in my car. Like. But I'm like, I try to do it by the book. Respect the process. But it's a pretty big hassle to be able to do that. And Toronto's kind of more of a Canada is in many ways, other than the publicly funded, government funded art scene, which I'm not a huge fan of, a lot of it. It's mostly a branch plant for Hollywood, right? I mean, if you think of Canadian movie theaters, not counting Quebec's its own deal because it's French language, so it's a different market. But I think something like 96 or 97% of movie tickets sold in Canada traditionally for the last forever have been for American films. Like Canadians actually have like 2% of the box office. Like it sucks. So there's no industry. It's just kind of like, so there used to be a gentleman's agreement, or like an informal agreement, I guess, with the studios and with immigration and all that, where Canadians would go down to Los Angeles for pilot season, or that you could go down and if you got a gig, they would get you a visa. And it was kind of like, yeah, we get it. We kind of own the entertainment industry, kind of owns the Canadian market. So they'll let people come across. Well, 9/11 kind of killed that. And my first foray was in 2002, right after, and they were like, no visas for Canadians. So yeah.
Oh, bummer, man.
So anyway,
well, that's what you get for bombing us. So.
I don't think the Canadians did that.
Well, it's debatable.
No, it's the Eastern Europeans.
Yeah, right. Wait.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody from outside of the map. All the blue part of the map.
Yeah, not America part. That I generally
that's what it's called. Not America.
They were from America.
They're from not America.
Not America.
There's
America, and then not America.
Yeah. Well, the whole world is.
And don't get too big for your britches. We'll come turn you into America, part America instead of not America. Ukraine.
Yeah. So Ukraine. I shouldn't even. Here's the beef, and I don't really want to get too heavy into Ukraine.
Let's get into Ukraine. Is that where your people
are from?
No,
they're from like former Yugoslavia. Like my father, when he was a kid, my grandparents. Long story short, during the war, it was bad. The Mussolini and his forces were busy in that area. My grandparents had just got married. They lost their first child due to starvation because they were living in shelters during the war. So, basically I'm missing an uncle, thanks to fascism. And then after the war, if you didn't cooperate with the communists, they sent you to a labor camp, which is what they did to my grandfather. So they managed to escape to Italy and then lived in a refugee camp, like a commune sort of place for better part of a year, and then they finally made it across to. They were going to end up in Australia, but then my aunt was born, so they had too many kids. They couldn't go to Australia, so they said, "Well, Canada will take you." So that's where they ended up.
that.
Yeah.
But
not Australia. Canada's
Not a, yeah, thank God for that. We have a strict no Australians policy on this podcast.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
thank God for that.
Oh,
Are they from Croatia? Or
yeah, Croatia.
Yeah.
But so it's again all that privilege. I'm like, yeah, all my generations of privilege. They fled communism. They were sentenced to labor camp by and
Right.
ended up with nothing and fled.
Right. Because of actual fascism and not just
fascism and communism.
From both sides.
So I despise both the ideologies equally because and so
they're the same thing. Like in the end, it's about power and control and authoritarian. Like there's some slight differences, but it's the same shit. It's all the same.
Yeah,
shit.
it's like same shit, different pile, right? Like
that's all it is. It's like, okay, this one has some more racist flavor to it sometimes. Like Stalin killed more Jews than Hitler did. Like they're maybe, I don't know, don't quote me on that.
Well, he killed more people.
Killed a lot of more.
Unless you count
more people.
Unless you count all the. Well, I don't know what the math is on that because then there's all the Russians who died in the war. The point is,
none of it's good.
How many? Look how many authoritarian ideologies there are in the world. Right? There are more authoritarian ideologies than there are non-authoritarian, like small L classic liberal ideologies, like monarchy, right? Absolute monarchy. That's just a hereditary fascism, right? Like in a sense, military dictatorship, same thing. Communist dictatorship, same thing. Like there's all these different forms of some small group or some, people telling everyone else what to do, And then there's this new idea, relatively for human history, relatively recent idea in the last couple hundred years of, hey, what about the people governing themselves and having this liberty and freedom and all that? What a crazy idea. Oh no, they can't handle that.
Well, speaking of freedom and shit, Joe Rogan. Well, because I was
hang on. Before we go to Joe Rogan, Ukraine.
Ukraine.
There's one beef I have with the whole Ukraine situation, and we'll leave it. Is that I think, if I remember correctly, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine, if I remember this correctly, Ukraine gave up their nukes on the promise that they would be protected. I think that's true. But it's, again, this is going back a ways, right? This is early 1990s. Right. So that's the issue, right? That's kind of this where it gets a little tricky and with NATO and all this other stuff.
Yeah, it was after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was we, as in like the West, will not move NATO east of Berlin. That was
there was an agreement. But there was also
an agreement.
But that was with Russia, right? To assure Russia that NATO wasn't going to
and we pulled ours out of Turkey, and they pulled theirs out of Cuba in like the 60s, and we pulled ours out of Turkey, and it was like, all right, this is the East, this is the West. And then we put a bunch of shit in the Baltics, and we're like, all right, now we're on your doorstep. And Russia's thinking like, well, what the hell? Like, you guys weren't supposed to go east of Germany.
True, but Ukraine gave up their nukes, I think, in exchange for an agreement that they would be protected by everyone, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why Ukraine is tricky, right? It's because we kind of owe them that deal, right? Do we honor that deal of like, look, they gave up their nukes, like, good little country. So now do we protect them from being invaded? Because if they had their nukes, they wouldn't be being invaded right now, would they? Right. They'd be like, no, nukes. Putin.
Yeah. I don't know. Did Ukraine have nukes, or did the Soviet Union have nukes there?
Well, when the Soviet Union, again, this is not
Ukraine.
What was the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union was all but these different countries, right? It was a federation, right? So every former republic or country of the Soviet Union was the Soviet Union. It wasn't just Russia, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So
my
I don't know
my
if
my,
there were,
my
like-
Russian history is actually I'm better at the older stuff than the newer stuff. The last couple
Yeah.
decades.
I don't know
Oh.
if there were nukes or not in Ukraine.
I
All I know
thought
is
that
that
was the deal.
well, all I know is that like Europe doesn't pay their shit into their militaries. They don't like they just rely on us to protect them.
Well,
Us
that was
as
by
in the
design
United
for a long
States.
time, right? We didn't want
Yeah.
Europe to have a strong military because
That-
last
that's-
time they did, it was ugly.
Sure, but now, that was when they were all fighting each other. But,
Yeah.
Belgium's not going to go to war with Luxembourg anytime soon. So
No.
it was basically like, okay, now all of the attention is turned eastward. And we're going to like prop you guys up for a long time. And if Russia tries any shit or the Soviet Union tries any shit, we're going to be there. But for years, they have not been paying their fair share into everything. Meanwhile, they have social safety nets and all of these
The paying,
great
you're talking about the
benefits.
NATO agreement.
I'm talking about NATO and just like their militaries. Like they do not have the capacity to defend themselves.
Well, that's the issue with NATO is actually there was an agreement. I think it was negotiated with Obama, but the agreement was that by 2024, the NATO members would increase their military spending to a minimum of I think 2 or 2.4% of GDP.
Yeah.
So I know Trump made a lot of hay over that, saying, "Oh, they're not paying their share. They're not paying their share." Well, it's sort of true, but also not entirely true in the sense that they have till 2024 to get to that target. Right? That's the agreement. There's no. It's not like they're not paying dues. Right? Everybody pays their dues, which is small. The issue is, are they achieving that minimum? Now, the United States spends more money than the next 10 countries on the planet in its military, which is insane. Right? Nobody can compete with that. And a lot of people might say, well, maybe if we weren't spending so much money on Lockheed, there could be some maybe less debt, national debt, and maybe some maybe a bit of healthcare or something like that, right? Now, being Canadian, I'm kind of halfway between. I look at both sides of this from Europe, and I've lived in Europe a couple times. And lived in the United States for a long time, and you kind of you start seeing all the different views. Like here's an example though, like Canada, right? Trump was always complaining about Canada not paying its dues. Well, Canada's shopping for a new Air Force. They've been shopping for a new Air Force for a number of years, and a couple of ships for the Navy. That's big outlays to buy out an entire fleet of fighter jets. Its current fighter jets are old. They need to be retired. So the F-35 was what was on the table. But then there were issues with the F-35. I don't know if you've been following that. So the F-35 is a bit of a turkey. It's not, and it may or may not be the right plane for defending Canada's land. It's a single engine, so a lot of people have an issue with that. So if you're flying around the Arctic in a single, you might want a double engine jet in case one blows out on you. And it's more of as far as I understand, it's more of like a tag-along bombing type of jet, where the F-22s go in and clear out. Those are the interceptors. Those are the fast attack planes. They go and make the skies safe, and then you come in with the F-35s and drop bombs on people. Well, is that the right jet for? That's great for doing bombing runs in the Middle East or something if you're going to war with Iraq or something. Yeah. But for patrolling Canadian airspace, is that the right jet? Well, you can't buy F-22s. No one's allowed to have them. So the F-35 turns out it's a turkey, maybe. So now they're like, oh, well, what about Gripen? What about, all these other, the Eurofighter, the Rafale? So they've been shopping for the right jet. This has taken several years. And as soon as they pull the trigger on that spend, boom, they're hitting their targets. Until then, they're under target because they're holding back billions and billions and billions on this purchase. See, so it's kind of like it's complicated. It's a complicated topic. Right?
I don't really give a shit what happens in Ukraine. It's my opinion. Like, I don't care. I'm one of those people. I tweet all the time that the U.S. government is more of a threat to us than the Russian government. Right. I do not give a shit what the Russians do. Like,
and we got proof of this.
Let them have their fucking war. I'm so tired of it, and it's all distraction. We can't handle our own shit here. Have you been? You live in LA, Joe. You lived in LA. Put the fucking military there and have them fix some shit. Go to Baltimore, go to parts of New York and Philly and New Orleans. Like, this is where we need help, not in Eastern Ukraine. I don't give a shit what happens over there. I mean, I hope no one gets hurt, but
and now we got to defend Joe Rogan.
Their own shit.
We got to defend Joe Rogan.
What's that?
We got to defend Joe Rogan. We should put some
put the military around Joe Rogan.
Because
defend his freedom.
Because Jen Psaki, or Psaki shit as I like to call her, she did you guys see this recently?
Psaki shit.
About the whole Spotify thing, and somebody brought this up at a press conference, and then she says this disclaimer is a positive step, but we want every platform to continue doing more to call out mis and disinformation while also uplifting accurate information. So this has been kind of blown out of proportion a little bit, because people were kind of taking that as like, oh, the government is like the White House is trying to stop Joe Rogan. It's not that exactly, but it's like,
yeah, I saw a little bit of that on the Angry Bluebird app earlier.
Yeah.
That's where we that's our ecosystem. I was just telling Joe, I was like, I fucking hate it so much, but then like I love it. Like I'll see something, there'll be some thread or something like, oh, I love this. And I kind of love being in it's not for our crowd, but I almost feel like it's fun being like the minority voice there.
Right.
On Twitter.
Yeah. On Twitter.
The sad thing is that Twitter is kind of, I think it's because journalists in general, I mean, they're journalists, activist journalists, they take their cues, and so do politicians now. They're like, they have their social media team like watching Twitter. What's Twitter angry at today?
And it doesn't work. Look at fucking Elizabeth Warren. Her campaign was an abortion, and like
it was.
Like, she was just doing what she thought was like on Twitter. Like, Twitter is such it's a fraction of the fraction of the population, and then within those fractions, it's like a very mostly specific demographic, and that's like mostly white, liberal, consultant class people. Like the vast majority of especially the vast majority of the blue checks. Yeah. And it's like, it's a bad political strategy.
Well, when that becomes the political headwaters for media, for politicians, and they're queuing off of what Twitter's mad at today, like, that's not good. And that's actually the only reason that I'm spending the amount of time I do on the stupid app, because if that's what's determining where we're going next, like, well, we got to get in there and start talking about this, because there's a lot of crazy people with a lot of bad ideas on Twitter too, right? Like, I've obviously been fairly vocal against a lot of sort of identitarian ideologies, left and right. A lot of people think I'm some big. I get the alt-right accusation all the time, but I jumped online 10 years ago really to start calling out excesses of the right, and only in the last 4 or 5 years have started calling out the excesses of the left. Twitter, it's far too influential. Everyone's far too scared of what happened. Twitter's gonna ruin my life, they're gonna come after me. Well, and they do. It's weird, toxic little world that it stretches into real life, though. That's the problem.
It does. Right. And that's where it gets disturbing, when it turns into doxing and stalking and credible threats of violence and stuff like that, which is not free speech. Like, those aren't like credible threats of violence. And doxing is not free speech. And people take, and like you said, calling out, we talk about this all the time, like the excesses of the right. Like, that's where a lot of people, I feel like, that kind of have views Joe and I tend to have, like, came from the left, where the left used to be about free speech. And like, I say it all the time on my laptop, I can't take it off. I have an ACLU sticker. Like, I used to be a huge fan. That's my dream job, was to work at the ACLU. I right out of law school, that's like one of the places I wanted to go. And it's just, they're terrible now. Like, they're awful. And actually, one of the big attorneys for them who really put them on the national map, Ira something, because his documentary is called The Mighty Ira. I forget his last name. He's Jewish, and I say that because he did the neo-Nazis in Skokie, Illinois case. That was really famous. And he came out saying, like, what do you do? Like, what are you doing? This is not what we're about. Like,
back when they had
free speech.
principles.
Yeah, back when they had principles, really, and you
Yeah.
stuck up for the value. And I do always take a step back here and say, like, you will see some things where ACLU is still doing good work, and I like to separate kind of local chapters from the national brand that they're creating. For instance, I'm in New Jersey, and in New Jersey, I did see them defending someone. It is unfortunate, but no, it's great here. Where they were, I just tell myself that, where they were defending a guy for having like a fuck Joe Biden flag or something like that, and it's like, yeah, it's not in good taste, but you're allowed to do it. Like, you're allowed to say it, and the ACLU is defending him from his town who fined him for some, like, for having the flag up like that. Like, that's what the ACLU is about. It's about defending speech that you dislike, like you disagree with. That's the speech that needs to be protected, not what everyone agrees with, because that speech doesn't need to be protected. Actually, this is interesting because I believe you're our first Canadian on the show, Joe. Is that right?
Yeah,
it's gone international.
Yeah.
It's gone. We've gone. Oh, actually, our first guest was from Wales, but
okay.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wales is in Canada, though, isn't it?
It's part of not America.
It's part of not America. Exactly.
Part of not America.
Yeah.
So whatever. Funny White people with funny accents.
Yeah.
So, you guys don't have the same free speech laws like we do here.
Sort of. Since I want to say back in the 50s, there was a thing called the Bill of Rights passed, and it was just a law. It was passed by Parliament, which is roughly the equivalent of Congress.
It's fancy Congress.
Yeah, and it's old school. And then in the, I want to say, and I should know this, in the 70s and 80s, or I think 1982, if I'm not mistaken, the Canadian Constitution was finally repatriated from Britain, and they added this thing called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is like which is taking that Bill of Rights, which was a law, which could be repealed by the next government. They could just get rid of that law. Well, the Charter is like the United States Constitution. It's real hard to get rid of. It's hard to amend. It's hard to change. You have to get all these, similar to like the process to make an amendment, which takes a lot of doing, has to have everybody agree, and same. So it is entrenched, except it's freedom of expression. I think it's there's little. That's the thing about going back and forth between Canada and the United States. It's so similar, but tiny little differences that can trip you up. But no, Canada does have basically free speech, but just not quite as like
robust.
Total, yeah. It's more like freedom of expression, I think. I'd have to look up the exact language on it.
So what if someone wanted to fly a Nazi flag in Canada? Would you be allowed to do that?
There was a case. There was some guy, some like Nazi white supremacist guy, I think out west, who was giving out pamphlets and stuff, right? And this is where it gets tricky. Again, I should probably look it up before speaking on it, but just off the top of my head, that's where you get your is this, well, in the last couple of years, in the last decade or so, right, we've had this new thing called hate speech and those sorts of crimes.
Right. That's I'm glad you brought that up, because here, people, especially our age, like
America, you could say what you want.
And people don't get that. Like, people don't like Americans don't understand. Like, I've had to tell this to educated peers who I'm like, no, hate speech is allowed. You understand that, right? And they're like, but why? I'm like, because what one person decides is hate speech, another decides is just regular speech. And then when that side's in power, then they're going to say what you say is hate speech. And that's the point. It's a slippery slope argument.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand that. It's like, again, it gets back to, just because you don't like it, like, that's the speech that's supposed to be protected. It's speech you don't like because someone else doesn't like yours. And that's not the same in Canada, right?
Well, Canada's, in a sense, that protection, that freedom of expression protection is much younger, right? It's much newer, so it hasn't been tested as much. It hasn't had the legal processes of being challenged in the courts, going all the way to the Supreme Court, and then becoming like further entrenched in that sense, right? Like there have been challenges to speech in American history, which have now gotten to the point where like it's really hard to go against it.
Right.
Whereas Canada's only had it since the 80s, right? Like,
right. So David Cronenberg, a filmmaker who I love, who's from Canada.
Yeah.
He was talking about this is back in the early 80s, and I'm curious if you know much about this. Back in the early 80s, he was doing an interview where he was talking about making, because at the time he was mostly doing like pretty out there sci-fi horror films. And it had a lot of, and he was doing, they had a lot of sets and violence. And he said, as hard as it is, because this is back in the early 80s in the US during the Reagan era. So it was, we had the moral majority. So so they were cracking down on a lot of sex and violence in movies. But he goes, as hard as it is to get your uncut version out there, you can still do it. You can still release it as unrated or just go the indie route or whatever. You can still do it. But in Canada, they actually require you to cut out those pieces that are objectionable. You have to throw those pieces out, and then if you don't, then you'll end up in jail. There was a lot more. It was way more strict when it came to expression.
That's loosened up over the last couple decades. I mean, the Cronenberg era was what 80s, early late 70s to 90s. That was his heyday. And Canada was very, very, very socially conservative, very not as brash. Canada's never been as bold or brash as America, but even in those days in the Reagan era, I mean, I remember I was a kid growing up, and there was lots of censorship. But again, a lot of it hasn't been tested, right? Like, for instance, a lot of was it Larry Flint was, a pretty central, made a pretty hard test on freedom of speech, freedom of expression in the United States, right? And that established certain freedoms, certain lines in the sand, and said, look, this is permitted now. Because prior to that challenge, they were going after him and doing all kinds of things.
Which I would like people to know. So Larry Flint was the creator of Hustler, and really he was taken to court by who was the big evangelist, like televangelist, basically one of these
wasn't Graham? Was it
Billy Graham?
Someone like that.
Yeah. Well, he published a cartoon about this guy. It might have been him having sex with his mother in an outhouse, I believe. And I was taken to the Supreme Court. Make a long story short, taken to the Supreme Court, and Larry Flint won on free speech grounds, right? Political speech or public figure, right? That was a big thing. That this wasn't just like Larry Flint's neighbor who he didn't like. Like this was a public figure, and that vote. I want people to understand that was a 9-0 vote on the Supreme Court. This wasn't like a 5-4 split one way or the other. This was a unanimous vote. So you had conservative justices, liberal justices. And I don't know if that would happen anymore. Now you would hope so with stare decisis, with what we have in both of our legal systems is the precedent, like judge made law, the precedent. So you would hope that, but it's gotten to the point where I don't know if this would be a 9-0 vote anymore, which is really scary. And the liberal justices being on the censorship side.
Well, yeah, because they're being brainwashed, right? Like, there's a reason a lot of this ideology is being pushed in the law schools, because they know that if they can train a generation of young lawyers to have alternate definitions for currently commonly used terms, and that's the sneaky part of it, right?
Yes.
So there are all these laws in the books, right? There's a law, but if we change our common understanding of the words that were used in those laws, then we can read them in a different way. And
I mean, this is the gimmick of that word's too soft for. That's like the strategy of authoritarian regimes all over the world, is changing what words mean, changing what something means, changing what a Jew means in Nazi Germany, or or a dissident, or or even here a communist. What's a communist during the Red Scare? like people who had like some left-wing sympathies or like weren't completely on board with the American war machine, like communists. Like, so it goes again. It goes.
Oh yeah, propaganda.
Direction.
It's propaganda is what it is. It's redefining things and trying to.
And as someone who went to law school, like, and it wasn't that long ago, luckily, I took a First Amendment class, like solely on the First Amendment, which is our free speech amendment, and it was good. Like the professor was great. It was very much on the kind of free speech that we've been talking about, right? I don't know if that's the case anymore. I honestly don't.
Speaking of changing definitions, I don't. So the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Did you guys see this? How they changed the definition of racism on their website several times?
They changed it back after Whoopi Goldberg.
I know, and here's the thing: when they changed it after the whole Whoopi Goldberg thing,
can you explain what they did? Like, can you be more specific?
Yeah. So this girl on Twitter, Sentra Stacy, who's a great follow. She posted all three of the definitions. So this is what it said initially. Racism is the belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another. So a pretty standard definition of racism, right?
What we all grew up with.
Exactly. Yeah. Then they changed it not too long ago. Racism, the marginalization and or oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people.
That's like the social justice activist definition.
And then after the whole Whoopi Goldberg thing, which she says the Holocaust was not about race, they changed it more or less back to the original. So now it says racism occurs when individuals or institutions show more favorable evaluation or treatment of an individual. But here's the thing. Here's the scary thing. For the new definition that they just changed to this week, they put in parentheses interim definition, as in we're just kind of waiting. This is the placeholder definition until we come up with something better.
Like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be. Because I don't mean to be the 1984 guy, but is this not just 1984? Like, I don't mean to be that guy, but it is. It's just changing. Yeah. It's like we were always at war with East Asia. Eurasia is our enemy, or as our friend. East Asia is our enemy, and it says now Eurasia is our enemy. East Asia is our friend. Like, it's the same shit.
Well, this is a tactic of the sort of identitarian activists, right? Like your critical race theory activists, intersectional activists, your gender theory activists, whatever. It's this type of activism that's identity driven, and its a tactic is to they make assertions that something is a certain way, and they present it as though it's fact. And they're saying things, and they're framing things in ways that are different.
You're an idiot and uneducated and a bumpkin if you don't use the speech we use, the words we use in the way we use them. Oh, you're still thinking that like racism can be against anyone? Like, no, that's racist and that's bigoted because it can only be against these marginalized. It only
flows in one direction, right? And that's which is not true, right? Everyone knows it's not true, but
like, what about? I go to New York City fairly often, usually like a couple times a month, and like I've witnessed, I'm not kidding. This is what I've personally observed is people being overtly racist to Asian people. Like I've seen that myself, and it goes on. You see it online. It's so weird to me. I'm shit you not. The last time I was in the city, I'm walking down to the subway, and an Asian guy's in front of me. And some guy just turns to him and like starts doing like overtly racist, like bowing and with an accent and stuff. And the guy I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why
what's
is
the
that
demographic of the people doing this?
It's almost always black or Latino. It's almost always. Rarely is it white. And so doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but especially the violence. I almost always see it. I mean, this is online. I've personally witnessed this.
Yeah, I've seen the clips.
I was on the subway another time, and this there was just a black guy. He was definitely mentally ill, and he's just yelling at Asians to get out of the country.
Well, and isn't this the danger in making
so that's not racism according to the EDL? That's not racism.
This is the danger of this redefinition of racism, saying it can only go in one direction, and it's just those people there, and what that implies. Everyone else gets a pass. Everyone else can behave in that manner, but we can't criticize it.
What about when white people aren't even involved? Like these situations.
Well, that's why I asked, right? Because everyone's going to say, "Oh, well, anti-Asian hate and racism." The assumption, according to the new definition, is that it's all a bunch of pasty face crackers doing all the hating, but it's
like
not.
If you saw that shit and it was like a MAGA wearing like country white guy, it would be all over the place. Like it would be, and like, I'm sitting there. Honestly, I'm feeling concerned for my well-being, and he's not even targeting me. He's talking to the Asians who are like near me.
Well, it's the first they came for the the poem. Yeah. I mean, they're targeting that group right now, and then they'll target another one next, and another one, and another one, another one, because everyone else has been given a free pass to be as racist as they want to be, because they've been told, oh, well, you can't be racist.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. And
I
thought there was kind of the height of it, and what scared me the most was, I'm an ADL, fine, whatever. Like, I know they've done good work, but I don't think of that. Like, was when literally Webster's and dictionary.com were changing their definitions during the Great Awakening of 2020. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? It's so dangerous.
Webster's
changing things. What was that?
Webster's changed the definition of race. Yeah. No, I'm bringing up the specific example. They changed it because a 22-year-old college student sent them a letter saying, hey, can you include systemic racism in your definition of racism? And they did it. It's like, that's all it takes. It's just one dumb college activist to change the definition.
Well, a lot of these organizations too. I mean, don't forget, we got a bunch of students all entering the workforce. So Kimberly Crenshaw, was it 1989 that she coined the term critical race theory? She called the movement that. I think I have a document.
I know she's the one who did intersectionality.
But she came up with the name critical race theory.
Okay.
And I have an essay by her that she wrote, I think in 2000, talking about how she named that movement. And I remember I was in undergrad in the early 1990s when that was the new thing, right? And there were all these programs that ended in the word studies, cultural studies. And it used to be women's studies. And then I guess they changed it to gender studies and post-colonial studies and literary studies. And it all comes out of this critical theory background, and it's very subjectivist. And I was a philosophy and history student at the time. I was supposed to go to law school. I'm a great disappointment in the family. But,
no, you dash a bullet.
Well, I thought, if I go to law school, I'm going to end up like hating myself and drinking for the rest of my life. And so I went into the arts and suffered, starved. But anyway, and it was all the rage, right? And so they've been pushing this stuff in academia since like hard in a formal way. I mean, it's been around longer. It's Derek Bell goes back to the 60s, 70s.
Derek Bell,
But they've been pushing this stuff in a very real, very intentional way since at least the 1990s. So that's decades of students graduating who've been indoctrinated with this stuff, who now work for, and it all hinges around language, right? So these people who studied this stuff, like, you got a cultural studies degree, what are you going to go do? Or a literary studies degree, and you learn all this stuff. Well, you're going to go work for Webster's. You're going to go work for Britannica. You're going to go work for...
Or I would say even before that, though, like in the 90s and I feel like 2000s and even into the 2010s, it was, that's just on these campuses. That doesn't make it into the workforce. Like, but then you grow up and you leave. And it's like, no, that is not what happened at all. Like, the 22-year-olds are now like in their mid-30s who are going through this, and they're running the businesses, and they kept that shit.
Well,
and now they're the ones controlling what their employees and nonprofits their coworkers and stuff say, and what HR where did they go into? They went into HR. Where they went, the literary studies majors, and they are now in all the HR departments.
There was the other day, and Britannica, which I always thought was a pretty good resource, is owned by the same people that own Webster's, apparently. I was on Britannica looking something up, and the political left, the definition of the political left, and the entry talks about, because the right and the left comes from the French Revolution, right? The ancient ancien regime, or whatever, the ancient regime, the old, the nobility and the church, the old regime, and then the new, which was sort of nouveau liberalism, the revolutionaries, and a mishmash of different competing groups. And then in the National Assembly, they had the ones who were supporting the king and the old way were on the right, and the ones who were of the people, the had this idea of we want to govern ourselves and we want to have rights and we don't want to be just subjects of the nobility, were on the left, right? And sort of like proto-liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
And the entry in Britannica online now reads, the socialists were on the left. And I stumbled across it and I was like, well, what? Wait a second. Is this a little bit anachronistic here? Like, what happened? The entry doesn't even, I don't even think it mentions liberalism. Doesn't mention liberal movement. Yeah. Which it jumps straight to socialism. I'm like, I don't even think socialism technically, unless maybe all you've ever read is communist pamphleteers, communist pamphlets, is the communist version of revision of history, or we're going to interpret history from a totally communist perspective, because how the hell are socialists in the French Revolution? And it says that the key ideology of the left is socialism, and communism is a far left version of that. That's what the current entry in Britannica says. So, and it says this was written by an editor of Encyclopedia Britannica. So I looked him up, found his name, and his little Twitter bird was there. So I clicked it, and he's a self-described pinko, which is a slang for communist.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Jesus Christ.
Right? I've never heard that.
Oh, pinko, yeah. Well, pink, right? Rouge, reds, the pinks, you know. But it's old. It's a bit old. But yeah, I'm like, gotcha. I'm like, holy crap. So I posted on Twitter about this. I said, this guy, this self-described pinko, a communist, is the editor at one of the editors at Britannica, is rewriting history to claim that the left means, and the French Revolution was a socialist revolution. And you're like,
I have a
crazy
personal experience. I'm from like North Jersey, so a lot of people who lived in my town worked in the city. Like a lot of parents worked in the city, and I played. I don't want to identify anyone. So say I knew someone whose father worked for the New York Times, and I went to their house once, and he was an environmental like focused writer and everything. I go to their house once, and I shit you not, in their dining room, taking up the entire, like the length of the wall, is a mural of like the communist revolution, that's
like he had the Che Guevara poster when he was in college, and then he graduated.
Yeah, it was $1 mural jarring jar. It was gigantic, and people had said like, oh, like this wasn't because I don't think you should be judged on your art necessarily. Like I like some propaganda stuff. I think it's cool, historical. But like, no, people are like, oh no, he's a communist. Like, what do you like? No, he, like there was, and then I saw it and I was like, holy shit, this is their dining room.
Yeah.
Like, and it had, I think it was Stalin. I can't remember if it was Lenin or Stalin, but he's like holding the book out, and everyone.
I think that's Lenin. Lenin was the one with the book.
Yeah, so I guess it was Lenin. I don't know why I'm thinking of Stalin now, but it was shocking. And I was like, oh my God, this is in their fucking dining room. Like, I mean, it shows how times have changed, because you didn't do that back during the Red Scare. I mean, that would be...
That's
free speech, though. You know what? That's free speech. Well, want a big mural of Lenin? I'm interested in Lenin. I thought Lenin was an interesting guy, historical figure. But when you're like, I don't know, it's very...
It's funny because, you get the freedom to be communist or have those to express yourself in that way under... modern Western liberal sort of democracy and with the constitutional freedoms, but you wouldn't have the freedom to disagree and have a dissident view in that society.
You couldn't be in the Soviet Union with the giant mural of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, and Uncle Sam.
And Uncle Sam. And that. I mean,
real quick, Pico just that word it just makes you think of like the '80s of just like Rambo.
I've never
like,
heard Pinko.
Yeah, it's very like
I like it. I mean,
like my older boomer relatives like would use words like that back in the day. Yeah,
Reagan era term.
Very much so. Yeah, but and I guess actual communists would ironically use that word to describe themselves. Yeah, so they think they're being funny, but it's funny, but it's not funny when they're rewriting history and they're in these positions. Yeah. And this is the problem: is that now you have younger generation, they're like, "What does this mean?" They go and look up the thing, and they say, "Oh, Britannica or Webster's, whatever," and they read it, and they think that that's what words mean.
The
right?
Holocaust was white people fighting other white people.
Yeah, like Whoopi Goldberg, right? Like, and I went out and bought dictionaries, paper dictionaries, a couple of years ago because the right was gaslighting language, and history. So, and I was fed up with it, and now the left is doing it, and it's like, guys, stop! Like, look, we can all have our political disagreements, but stop. Trying to rewrite. It's dishonest, right? But the dictionaries, and I didn't realize this until recently. Webster's, I think, even posted on their Twitter. They said, "Oh, we are not a denotative dictionary. We're a descriptive dictionary. So we just describe the words as they're currently used. Right. So they don't. So what use is that, right? Same thing. It's this idea that so language evolves, right, over time. Usually, we can all go back and read like Shakespeare or Chaucer and go like, yeah, the English language has obviously evolved.
I wouldn't even say that far. We were talking about it last episode, 2 episodes. The word gay has changed several times in this country over like 20, 30 years. Same with, I was thinking today, actually, like the term queer. Queer meant weird, right? And then it was basically synonymous with gay, whether I think it was male or female, right? And now I honestly don't know what queer means.
I think it just means like of a non-heteronormative sexuality or something like that. Like you're just not one of the binary sexualities.
But it's not it's not synonymous with gay anymore.
Well, I think it includes gay, doesn't it?
Well, it's its own letter on the acronym.
Yeah, I don't know.
I haven't seen it used as gay in years.
True.
And I don't know what it means. And I don't.
It's funny because one of my first acting gigs was on a TV show called Queer as Folk, and it was totally gay. It was gay. It's all gay stuff. And now, again, but the problem is like, sure, words evolve, but the activism now is intentionally changing words, which I think is a different thing.
Yeah, it's not natural.
It's absolutely different.
It's not natural.
Which pisses me off as a writer, where sort of like, no, like my whole art, or at least a big part of my art is like, I want this sentence or this line of dialogue to hit a certain way. So I go through all these different iterations of sentences and things. And it's sort of like, no, like the reason why I do this is because words mean things. This has a different connotation than that one. But if it's sort of like, if we start getting into this territory, like, well, words I don't really like that definition anymore, so I'm going to use it this way. It's like, to me, it depreciates the language.
Yeah, and the problem here's part of the problem too is that the English language, right, is used by many people all around the world.
Yes.
Right, and if one country or one region starts changing the fundamental meanings of words, and political concepts, I think it should be like slang terms, smaller word, everyday stuff. Sure, fine. People can play around a bit, right? Poetic license. But when we're talking about specific political terms and concepts that have actual history to them, that are like the French language, the French Revolution, right? What does right and left mean? Where does it come from? How has that evolved? When they start intentionally changing it, or they do it in a way, all of a sudden you're going to have people all around the world no longer speaking the same language, even though they speak the same language. And that's a problem.
Well, so I think what I was getting at before is, to the people who are changing those terms, that's not the problem. It's supposed to be like a shibboleth of exclusivity. Like they want it to have certain terms. If you don't use that, you're an outsider and you're in a negative way. Right. And I do think, though, that this is a losing strategy. Joe and I joke about all the time is the whole like Latinx craze. That's not only do about 2 to 3% of Latinos actually use that term, but I think
apparently it's not very well liked.
A third actually find it offensive, and they look at it as, hey, you like white liberal people, you're changing our language. Like that's colonial shit. Like that's the imperial colonial shit that you accuse your ancestors of doing. Like you're doing it just instead of for gold and Christianity, you're doing it you're doing it with language. And so it is a losing strategy, don't get me wrong, and it does keep happening, and I think it does push a lot of people out, and eventually people get scurrilously attacked. I can't say that word. For using the wrong term, and they kind of go, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here? Like, I was on your side, and because I use an outdated term, maybe by as much as like a month, now I'm ignorant and a bigot and all of that, and it does turn a lot of people off. So in a way, it's backfiring.
You can't keep up with it. Part of the problem, though, is were you familiar with the Timnit Gebru, I think is how you say her name? I'm not sure. The Google AI diversity officer that got fired last year, or didn't get fired. She resigned, and her resignation was accepted. You guys didn't see that one?
What was the substance of it? Maybe.
So she was the chief of diversity for Google's language learning AI, I believe. And she apparently put a paper, her and a couple other people at Google, put a paper in the Google servers, in the Google community. And some people complained about it. They complained to the bosses and said that they didn't like it. So then the higher up said, "Hey, can you retract this paper? There's some people who've complained about it." And she said, "Well, who complained? Right? Who would dare complain?" And they said, "That's not your business." And she said, "No, I want to make it." She gave them an ultimatum and said, "If you don't tell me, then I'll quit." And they said, "Fine, then we accept your resignation." Of course, all the social justice world got upset because they pushed her out. They said, "Oh, right. Well, she wanted names of people that she could go and bully."
Yeah.
Right? Because, and this is the part that got lost in the shuffle here, is what was the paper about?
I was going to ask that. Like, what was the paper?
So, it was part of the paper, and I think it was TechCrunch. I'll send you guys I saved it and copied it. Because I know Verge did a lot of reporting on it, but I think it was like TechCrunch or Wired. Someone actually did a read through of the paper and what was in it. They got a copy of it, and part of it was that they wanted to tell the Google's language learning AI, they didn't want it learning organically. They didn't want it learning. They say, "Oh, well, like Webster's, we're descriptive. We go with based on what people are using, language based on." Well, she and her partners in this, they proposed that instead of Google's language learning AI being able to learn organically, they should skew it towards the social justice definitions of words, because they don't want the Google's language learning AI to get corrupted by all the people out there who don't use those words correctly, according to the new rules that the social justice activists want to put in place.
Right.
So the average person, the average kid, the average 14-year-old, 20-year-old, anyone, like boomers even, "Hey, Google, what does this mean?" Right? Like, you see it all the time. If the main source or major source that people turn to just to understand what words mean are being intentionally skewed by activists, like, that's not language evolving. And and I brought this up a few times, and people are like, "Oh, what are you talking? I don't really get it." But I see that's not language evolving. That's the world being based. I hate this word, but it's gaslighting.
Yeah.
It's gaslighting language.
Right. I remember on Twitter, I got into a debate with a feminist chick, and she was talking about how she was about how we're living, at least in the U.S., how we're living in a patriarchy. And I said, "Well, what do you mean by patriarchy?" Because I mean, like a true patriarchy is a system in which women are not allowed to hold positions of power. Like that's an actual patriarchy.
Yeah.
And then she goes, "Yeah, but that's just the dictionary definition of patriarchy. A real patriarchy is one in which there are attitudes towards women and stuff. It's just, but of course she went from like an actual definition to something that you can't measure because it's about attitudes and biases." And it's like, oh, come on.
It's about her lived experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is redundant and a stupid term. And I hate it.
It is.
What other kind of experiences are
a buddy of mine called it anecdata.
That's really good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Anecdata. Data point of one.
I'm taking that, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
That.
But it's like, great. So you have a data point of one in your grand study of society, right? Yeah. You got the sociologists and their navel gazing.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, and that's it, right? It's basically, well, this is what I feel. right?
Yeah.
And I guess was it Shapiro? Ben Shapiro said was he the guy who said
Fuck your feelings.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Well,
Yeah.
and here's the problem: feelings don't care about facts, right?
Yeah.
Like they're totally irrational and crazy.
Yeah.
And while I feel this is the truth, or there's the idea of knowledge being situated, like what the? It's knowledge is either a thing is either factual or not. You either know it's true or it's not, and
Right.
you either know a thing or you are mistaken.
Right.
Right?
No.
But if I haven't seen it, therefore it doesn't exist.
No.
Right. I don't believe in it. Poof, it ceases to exist. I feel like we're living in crazy world. Like you want to it's.
So just for the hell of it, during this conversation, I went to thesaurus.com and I just compared the definitions of conservative and liberal on
thesaurus.com.
Yeah, thesaurus.com. And it's not black and white, but it's sort of like conservative definitely has they definitely give it more of a negative slant. Like you'll see words like this is synonyms with conservative, right-winger, traditionalist, an opponent of change, diehard, reactionary. Whereas when you look at liberal, it's like enlightened, flexible, humanistic, giving, free, prodigal,
not
abundant.
not the bad ones.
Well, here's the funny thing about that is that according to the new definitions of words, right? According to Britannica now, of what the left means. Right. If according to Britannica, according to socialists, actually, and I've interacted with a couple, I basically follow everybody back on Twitter. Anyone who follows me, I follow them back. And I've done this for a long time. So I've interfaced with some interesting people like left and right and across in between. Yeah. Socialists will be like, to them, liberals are right wing. Yeah. Right. If you're a socialist, no, they're on the right. And it's like, well, no, liberalism is traditionally on the left. But it's not the far left.
Right.
But now, because we have this sort of pseudo-Marxist a conflict theory type of politics going on but it's identitarian instead of class now. And basically the left, which is I
know these terms are
liberalism or liberal values, small L, classic liberal values, are now conservative, I guess, right? Because what are you trying to conserve? What are you trying to, you're resistant to change? It's like, well, so now liberals are sitting there going, well, we're not left in that way, but we're trying to protect these institutions of freedom of speech and civil rights and individual, like you guys have read some of the Delgado stuff. There's that little clip that people post a lot of time, the critical theory that they want to get rid of
like the liberal order of thing,
and presumption of innocence, and they're like, wait, no, we need those things, right? Oh, well, you're not those are classic liberal values, right? But now if you defend those things, they call you a conservative. Right? As when I was growing up, conservatives were usually religious, very big on censorship, like social mores. They were really, no fun is allowed. Everyone has to go to church 3 times a week, and no no laughing, no smiling, and no dancing, right? Footloose. It was footloose. So and then so what do these things mean now, right? So according to the thesaurus, they're going to have to update that to include liberal, liberal.
We type in conservative, liberalism pops up.
Because I mean, the sort of, yes, there's still people around who are like what I call social conservatives. They're religious conservatives. They're very trad, very like, let's go back to the 1950s when father knows best and leave it to beaver, right? And all that crap. But boomer childhood paradise, this myth that they. But those people they're still around, but they're few and far between these days. Was it Justin Amash posted something last year? He said, I hereby reclaim the word liberal on behalf of classic liberalism. Right?
Maybe,
Right?
Sounds like something he would tweet.
Because like I grew up conservative. I grew up, lots of church. Jesus camp in the summer, and and the rhetoric was always like liberals, they're communists, right? They're socialists, like, and you conflate, and this is true in Canada and the United States have this very similar and share media basically, right? So you get the same talk radio, you get the same TV shows, you get the same mass sort of stuff. And if you're getting it from the right, it was like, aha, and I always kind of thought that was odd, because then you'd read history and you read political textbooks, and that's not what liberal means. It has an actual historical specific thing, and socialism is a very different thing. They have certain philosophical ideas in common, in the sense that and don't forget, like, conservative also used to mean monarchist, right? Right, so like old, or theocracy, that was a big one, right? Like, think about that. Like Saudi Arabia, that's a very conservative country. There's patriarchy too.
Exactly. That's an actual patriarchy.
I always wanted to put like liberal feminists and a real patriarchy like that, and just like I'm not a big reality show guy, but I would pay for oh my God, I would love that so much. You see it sometimes. Speaking of like reality shows, and I'll make this brief, I do like the show called 90 Day Fiance. I fucking love it, and I love it's like one American and one international, a couple. And sometimes, especially when they have a show called The Other Way, it's called 90 Day Fiance The Other Way, and the American goes to the other country. And sometimes the culture shock is just there was one of my favorites was let's say voluptuous black girl from Florida who's a rapper and flaunt herself a lot. And wear, revealing clothing. Her fiance was from Jordan, so she went there.
Oh wow!
And I was like,
yeah, that's not gonna fly over there.
And one of the best lines was like, my family found your Instagram account, and like this isn't like part of Islam, and so she was like, oh, is like spreading rumors part of Islam or something. It was really good. And talking shit part of Islam too. It was really good.
Oh man,
I mean, I think people would be amazed at how if they ever saw real patriarchy.
That's why
right?
I'm all for. I am for. I'm part of my platform when I run for whatever thing I run for is going to be sending gender studies professors to Pakistan. I am all for it, because we send Tillman
those kind of like
during a global fucking pandemic when people are starving and losing their homes, or maybe not losing their homes because of the moratorium, but getting shit from their landlords and losing their jobs and their businesses. Our Congress sent $10 million to gender studies in Pakistan. I'm not making this up. I don't know if I'm not joking. This is not a joke. They did this. And I say we send the professors over there with it.
Well,
make it a reality show.
You know what they need in Pakistan, places like that, is some second wave feminism, right? Like old school feminism about like original feminism, where it was like equal rights and like treating
like Susan B. Anthony. Like,
but they don't. That doesn't. But they got rid of that, right? Like they're in the fourth wave now, where it's all intersectional.
And, First wave would be like, we're also human.
It's the suffragettes. Like, can we vote? And
we
maybe
also people. That's good. Agreed. Second wave, third wave was like the sexual revolution, right?
I think third wave had a bunch of different components, but one of them was
like the 60s
through the 90s. I think being sexually liberated and
sexual liberation,
and equal pay for equal work and things like that. This new intersectional feminism is, and it's funny because they've snookered themselves, right? Because under intersectionality, as soon as, and I think it's kind of funny that intersectionality, which is Kimberly Crenshaw's concept, and I like to say intersectionality broke feminism, right? Because as soon as you add intersectionality, right, now you have all these layers of oppression, different groups claiming to be more oppressed than the others, and now feminists are getting upset.
TERFs.
Because they're the bad guy now, right? For like wanting to have
one of my favorite terms. I call it
the turf war.
And Joe, I have a list of regular. So I have a segment I want to start called speaking of French Revolution, Robespierre of the week. And like J.K. Rowling is like she got Robespierre. Like you think you can never be progressive enough. And the second you you don't say the right thing, you don't have the right view, you have the wrong think, basically, you get Robespierre. So that's a new segment. We're starting it today, Robespierre of the week. I mean, J.K. Rowling obviously has been on for a while, but my favorite term is dinner party turf. It is my favorite term that I've heard.
Never heard that one.
Dinner party turf. That's a new one for me.
I forget who tweeted it. Yeah, it was like on Twitter and stuff. It was during like when the big turf thing came out. Yeah. It's basically a like wealthy feminist woman who has dinner parties, but like kind of that old school feminism,
right? Yeah,
DC elite liberal, and now they're like the enemies because they don't want dicks in the locker room or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a problem. Like, I mean, I feel badly for, like, for instance, like lesbians, right? Like, they're being told
there aren't anymore.
Well, they're being told that they're
they're
they
gone.
Don't exist.
They don't aren't anymore. Katie Herzog's the last lesbian in America.
Well, they're being told that they're phobic and because they don't want to be with certain people, and it's like, just let people love who they want to love, as long as everyone's consenting adult.
If a lesbian doesn't want to have sex with me, they are a bigot.
No.
Yeah, right.
That's my stance.
That's my new pickup line from now on.
Your pickup line.
I'm joking, obviously. God damn, I hate throat clearing. I'm joking.
Here's a fun one for you. Just going back, if we rewind, we're talking about first wave feminism and like suffrage, women's suffrage. Yeah. And every year we hear about suffrage and the suffragettes, and we learn about women's suffrage. And I asked this question to a number of people, and it's part of something I'm working on. But we all learn about women's suffrage, and that was 1918, 1920, and then around, and in different countries around the world, it happened slightly, but roughly around the same time. So universal women's suffrage. When was men's suffrage? There's my question.
Universal male suffrage?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're not there yet. We still got a long ways to go.
Because you had to own land.
Well, that's it, right? So roughly,
white,
approximately. Well, no, not always.
No, not always, but not at the beginning. Yeah. Could black men who were free, they couldn't
free and property owners? I'm not sure. And this is the problem. It's murky because no one talks about it. We've spent the last 40 years constantly going over women's suffrage and feminism, right? It's because feminism's big, and that was necessary, sure, because there was some imbalance. But I think to some degree we've neglected some other aspects of history here, where I think it's roughly around 1918, 1920 for women. And I think it was about the 1850s for men, which is not that long before.
Yeah.
Right. And I saw a number, and it's hard to find information on this. I saw a number that said what percentage of men had the vote prior to the, like in like the British colonies, right? In pre or even slightly post American Revolution in the world, because there's this narrative, right? There's this narrative that, and it's the patriarchy, right, which we talked about earlier, that men have controlled history since the dawn of time, and they're all guilty of oppressing everybody, right? And I'm like, whoa, no, wait a second. Most people, including most men, were oppressed for most of history, right? Very few people had political franchise. Very few people had the vote. It was the aristocracy, which is a tiny percentage of people actually had vote. And then when people started getting the vote, you had to own property. What percentage of people owned land and were eligible to vote? And so men's suffrage, the idea of like all males being able to vote, happened just slightly before women. Like what, a generation or two? That's it.
Yeah.
So it's not since the dawn of time. It's nobles, kings, and emperors, and queens, and countesses and duchesses. Like there've been women who've ruled too throughout history. Yeah. So there's this narrative. There's this skew where we neglect the fact that the vast majority of people, not to mention all the crimes of the history of oppression, right? Perpetuated by who, right? I'm like, well, my ancestors were starving in the dirt
Yeah,
poor
yeah.
farmers, and and I don't remember, like, unless you're descended from nobility,
Right,
the
right.
chances are your family history was oppressed,
Yeah, yeah.
not an
That's
oppressor.
interesting.
Should we should we wrap it up on that? No one should ever vote.
That's the big lesson. No, that's fascinating though. I mean, because like so much is going on back and forth about power and privilege, and it's sort of it's much more complex than one group of people ruled everyone else. It was,
Yeah, and it's this whole group identity thing, right? It's stupid. Lumping people into a group based on what they look like or what their ethnic background is or whatever is stupid. It's because you don't know what their direct family history is, and frankly, what's the expression? From rags to riches to rags again, or short sleeves in 3 generations or something.
Yeah.
After about 2 or 3 generations, unless you're a member of the royal family, and you have like entrenched holdings, which is very few people on this planet have that.
Right.
Most of us, like, yeah, sure, maybe 6 generations ago you had a wealthy relative, and then the next generation they were dirt poor again.
Yeah.
We're not like. I just, this idea of it's almost conspiracy theory level thinking to think that this group was all like that and that group is all like that, and everybody is, that we could sum people up so simply.
Right.
I mean, this goes back to, like, I'm always posting about this. I'm sure you've seen this.
Joe
is like treat, everyone's an individual. We start with that.
Absolutely, man. And we should probably start wrapping it up. But this is great, though, man. We covered a lot of great topics here. And
it was a good chat. Yeah,
we really did.
Yeah, covered all kinds of shit.
Over.
And and we should do this again sometime, man. It was a lot of
absolutely.
fun.
Do you want to tell the listeners where they can find you, and if you want to share anything in particular?
Well, where they could find me. I mean, I'm on Twitter.
Where do you live?
What's your
address?
Yeah. In case anyone wants to dox me,
are you
show up at 4 a.m.
Where are you?
Knocking on my door. No, I mean, I'm actually about to start posting stuff on my my personal website. It's just been a black screen for years. So if people want to find what I'm up to, they can find me either on Twitter at the handle David Krae or davidkrae.com. I'm started getting organized with my online presence. I've been doing this for shits and giggles for far too long. I think I got to start formalizing some of my activities.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll include those links in the YouTube description.
Yeah. Or just send it to the email. And
yeah, there's nothing there yet, but soon. So, I don't have like a Venmo or a PayPal me or any of that crap yet.
Or OnlyFans.
No, well, my only... We won't talk about that. No. For the next...
the next episode,
Yeah, there's that footage from that Queer as Folk episode,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Don't look it up.
All right, well, thanks again for coming on, man. And
right on.
again sometime.
Yeah, good chatting with you guys.
Yeah.
And Joe and David,
Yeah.
Stay reckless and fight the crits.
Yeah, stay reckless, man. All right, take care, everybody.
Take care.